All right, Michael, last example I want to give you is something that comes from the world of what's called drama management. And the way I'm going to introduce this to you is I'm going to point out what we've actually been talking about so far. So I'm cheating a little bit for you and helping you with what have we learned part of the lesson. So I'm going to claim that if you think about at least the last few things about communication and coaching, particularly on the coaching thing with human beings, we've kind of talked about three different ways that a human can communicate to an agent. The first is demonstrations, right? You show the example of one particular drawing through a grid world to do inverse reinforcement learning, and that was a demonstration. And I can give you multiple demonstrations. We talked a little bit about rewards, and that what a human can give you is rewards for various things that you do, and that's a kind of reward shaping way. And the last thing we talked about was policy shaping, where what the human is communicating to you is not demonstrations and not reward values, but actually telling you what the correct policy thing is in response to things that you've done. And the last policies is different from the first demonstrations in that in the first case, you would actually demonstrate what the right action is. But here with the policy shaping, you're just giving critique that gives information about whether a particular policy is correct or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's these different kind of mechanisms for giving feedback.
Right. So I want to talk about another sort of model and way of doing coordination, this time between a human and an agent who's interacting with another human, right? So in the cases we described before, there were two. There was, the human and there was an agent. But here I'm going to say there's a third person. So I'm going to replace the human with what I'm going to call a player. For example, a player of a game like Pac-Man. The agent, which in this case would be Pac-Man. And a third human, I'm going to call the author. So in the world of drama management, there's this basic idea that there are these things like choose your own adventure stories. There's ways of seeing tasks in the world as if they are games, where there's some author, someone who designs the game, designs the system, whether it be Pac-Man or a story or a movie or anything that you can imagine, any sort of interaction in the world, and wants to build an agent, which is actually a system which interferes with a third agent, so to speak, which is the player, the person that's controlling what's going on in this world. So in this Pac-Man example, the author would be the person that created Pac-Man. The player would be the person controlling Pac-Man, running around in this world and eating. And then the agent would be the actual Pac-Man game itself. And that agent might have the ability to change the way the ghosts behave, to set up another level that has different properties or whatever it wants. And the goal of the agent is to create an experience for the player that is consistent with whatever it is the author wants. Does that make any sense at all?
At a high level, how does the author express what he or she wants?
That's a good point. So the author wants to tell the agent something, the player is going to be interacting with the agent, and the author never gets to play with the player. How does the author express to the agent what it wants? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about, but let me just kind of give you a little preview. Imagine that the author says to the agent, I want the player to be able to win every level, but only after they've died several times in that level. I want the player to feel like they have to learn how to play better. So the game has to be hard, but it can't be so hard that the player can never win.
Okay.
Now, I haven't told you how to communicate that with numbers, but you can imagine that that's an objective function. It's a thing I could write down that I keep track of, how quickly a player can go through a level, whether it gets better over time. I could come up with a function that tries to capture elements of that, either directly through the experience or by describing properties of the game, properties of the Pac-Man level that need to be traded off one another in terms of things like difficulty.
Good.
So there's lots of ways of doing it, and people have been worrying about this problem for many, many years now. And I want to describe a particular mechanism that combines this notion of demonstrations and rewards so that you can come up with a way for this author to convey information to the agent so that the player has an experience that is consistent with the author's intent. Okay?
Neat. Yeah, that seems to fit with a couple of the things we've been talking about in this lesson.
Excellent. So let's dive in.